Thanks so much, Andile. We're very, very chuffed to be here. It's lovely to be back on your screens again. It's been a while, actually. At least I'm not showing the weather this time, as I might have done before. And with me is a very, very well-qualified and well-esteemed panel to have a little bit of fun with this topic over the next 45 minutes or so. Let me start by introducing to my right, on the far side, that is Kekeleto Tsiloane. She is an engineer and she's the founder of Ramitsilo Manufacturing and Construction. It's an SME that is very, very into the idea of energy efficiency and climate change. We'll unpack that a little bit closer to the time. Next to her is David Nichols. He is the chairman of the South African Nuclear Energy Corporation. He's also worked very, very high up in Eskom and has been in the energy space in South Africa for many, many years. Welcome, David. Then across to my left, close to my left here, that is Dr. Inga Jacobs-Marta. She is the country rep for South Africa for the International Water Management Institute. Welcome, Inga. And then on her far left, that is Shamini Harrington. She is the VP. VP is a very, very American term, isn't it? The VP for Climate Change for, of all companies, Sasol. So I'm really, really interested to find out how she deals with her very empty inbox through the course of this discussion. Let's start, though, with Tasneem. Tasneem, you and I have been on panels before, I think, when we've been talking about climate change issues. We've generally been in front of quite green audiences, but I'm going to push you a little bit today and ask you, can a country like South Africa afford to be worried about climate change? Should we not just be pushing forward and sorting out our economy?
Thanks, Simon, and very nice to see you again, and also hello to all the panelists and all the participants. Well, Simon, I think that the appropriate question should be, can we afford not to address climate change? And I think that the important mindset shift around climate change being viewed as an environmental problem is something that we really have to address in this country, and also just not in this country alone, because it is not an environmental issue. It is deeply economic and deeply social. Also, climate change is not a theoretical concept. It's not a theoretical threat that is going to happen in the long term. In fact, we know that we are experiencing climate change today, and it is getting worse and worse in terms of the impacts itself. So this is, again, something that we have to, as I said, shift our minds around, but also be very clear that the science is becoming far more assertive in this space and far more confident in its findings and in its attribution. And especially the recent, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the esteemed panel of scientists across the world that has come out with their 1.5 degree report, a special report that highlights the fact that if we do not radically transform our systems within this next decade, then we stand very little chance of preventing dangerous and runaway climate change. And so we do have a challenge, and that we do need to listen to the science. It would have been like us saying, well, we won't listen to scientists to advise us how to deal with the COVID pandemic as an example. So we have to be consistent. Science is important. Also, the science has told us if we are going to have these radical transformations, then we obviously have to have very inclusive processes to address these transitions that we are going to be needing to do. And South Africa is going to have to grapple with this need for a transition. We need to also...
Let me jump in there quickly, Tasneem, and I'll just ask you. Sorry, let me also just quickly introduce you, which I'd forgotten to do. Tasneem, of course, is the Executive Director of the Climate Action Network International. Tasneem, I mean, you mentioned the COVID response, and I thought that was a really interesting example, because if there's one thing we've learned about following the scientists in COVID response is scientists are very, very good at giving you good answers for their area of expertise. So if you listen to an epidemiologist around COVID, you know you've got to lock down your entire economy, and often bankrupt a country in order to try and get rid of it. The same is often true of climate, that it's the climatologists might have very, very different views to economists in terms of the appropriate road forward.
Yeah, no, look, I mean, of course, scientists have to, they're not policymakers, but they do direct us towards what we can do. So the 1.5 report, for example, Simon, which I'm sure you're familiar with, very clearly tells us what, to ensure that we have these radical transformations that's needed in systems, energy, transport, industrial, etc. We would need to ensure that there are inclusive processes so that wider society co-owns the transformation. Now, the big thing in this country, and I have led the work on this in my capacity as a commissioner in the National Planning Commission, is the need for us to be proactive in our planning. Also, not to see that addressing climate change is a burden, but see it as a potential opportunity to reset our economy. We cannot be talking about a successful economy if we have witnessed real problems in this country and many other countries related to poverty and inequality, which, of course, COVID has just laid bare. So planning for a just transition is important. And this has to be an inclusive process of all the critical social partners in the country, because we cannot lurch from crisis to crisis. What we need to do is to build the resilience of our economy, to be able to be resilient to multiple crises, including health pandemics, including the climate crisis. And of course, we have to forefront addressing poverty and inequality at the center, because that is where we have seen the biggest impacts of any kind of crisis.
Is the way that most sustainability experts that I speak to these days are thinking, that we no longer think in terms of planting trees to capture carbon or something like that. It's far more about making systems more resilient, and in fact, in many ways, doing all the things to combat climate change that scientists say we should be doing anyway. Becoming more energy independent and embracing our green spaces and protecting our ecosystems. All of those things we should be doing regardless of whether or not climate change is a thing. Dr. Jacobs Marta, let me bring you in now. From the perspective of water management and water resources, South Africa is a very, very water-constrained country. If you listen to some of our experts, we think that we might get to a stage quite soon, in fact, if we're not there already, where our economy is absolutely constrained by water. Are we at a stage with climate change that we accept that it's happening and just adapt, or is someone from your background still hoping that as a nation and as a world we can become more carbon neutral and actually try and slow climate change?
Well, I think maybe just to say, I think, picking up also on Tasneem's point, I think we're reaching a stage where climatologists and economists, there's a bit of convergence, that climate adaptation done right will lead to better development, better growth. And certainly, from the scientist perspective, from research for development, that's certainly where we are, the stance we take. I think in terms of the policy framework, I think there's still some ways to go. So, while we do have a very sophisticated climate change governance framework, there's a lot of, it's a classic case, of robust policy development, but we're lagging in terms of implementation. And it's the same in the water space as well as climate. So I think there's lots of space for us to improve. And certainly, if we look at where we've come from over the past 2 decades, we've certainly seen the evolution of the policy framework, but there's been a bit of a delay, certainly since 2010, 2011, in terms of implementation. So I think there's lots of progress made, but indeed we still struggle with some of the challenges around technical capacity to implement, competition and tensions between the key players, the lack of a robust climate change finance strategy for the country. So there's a host of challenges. One maybe also to pick up on is, this sort of disconnect or this policy incoherence between climate change goals and also development goals that we find in things like our IPAP, Industrial Policy Action Plan. So certainly to move to a point of convergence is where we should be talking.
Yeah, I mean, the scary thing there is you say something that I must have heard 100 times in panels like this. In South Africa, we've got good policy, we've got good direction, we've got good knowledge, but we fall down on the technical actual application of all of these things. Unfortunately, let me move across to Kekulethu, who doesn't have the luxury of worrying about the sort of big policy type stuff. You've made the decision really to make this a core part of your business. Do you want to just quickly introduce to us why that is so, but also what informed that decision?
Firstly, the great question. Thank you. So, we firstly needed to acknowledge what effects climate change has already given us, and we as companies, as businesses, need to see climate change as opportunity and not just a threat, So we need to invest in the future now, and we need to make the changes we need to do now effectively. So we as Aramzilo then decided that we need to solve a problem, which is plastic pollution. And we created an innovative brick that recycles all type of plastics, so even your non-recyclable plastics. So we've allowed our landfills to have more space, so they can be used for better things like recreational purposes or housing. And we took on that responsibility regardless of the rules and regulations that are there, and that we still need to fight for, We took a stand and decided that we are going to do it. We started as our own individuals deciding on this and doing our own research, letting nothing stop us, only considering the fact that we need to create a better world. We need to stop waiting for people to do things for us, and we need to take advantages and do things ourselves. So if more opportunities are created, or better yet, are seen by SMMEs through the greener arena, we will then embrace a greener future. We will have such great opportunities and great innovations. So it's time that SMMEs embrace climate change and its opportunities, and most importantly, stop seeing it as a threat and stop relying on other people to make the change that you need to start.
Are you still at the stage of relying on the quirkiness of doing something slightly different and maybe the sort of green boast opportunity that your clients get from using your bricks, or are you able to compete against mainstream materials?
Luckily, because we had the construction background, we needed to make a product that we are also familiar with. So with our innovation, we wanted to keep in mind that people, when they think going green, they think something expensive, something that needs training, something that needs other building materials. So we made the brick to have the same look and feel as a traditional brick. So that the terminology might be a bit difficult for us to pass on to our customers, because when you say plastic brick, people think about a brick that's made entirely out of plastic and that's gonna burn, So we needed to make a brick that is strong, durable, and also fire retardant. So it went through tremendous tests, and it came out with higher compressive strength and more added benefits. So we kept to a product that is still familiar, that is cost effective, and that can compete with methods and stabilities that we are using and used to today. And it's not only benefiting the environment, but it's also tackling the lack of housing that we are faced with. And we are able to build roads, hospitals, and schools with this building with more recyclable plastic materials. And that's something that thankfully South Africa has also encouraged, that there's more roads that are built out of plastic and also roads that are built now out of tires. So more people are embracing greener environmental building methods, and that's a plus for us.
Excellent, thank you. And really, really interesting, that idea of, the building industry is one that is quite attuned to green initiatives. Certainly in a marketing sense, and they have awards for green design and all of those sort of things. So it is a space that I can imagine Kekulethu and her company, which is Ramtsilo Manufacturing, that they can find a comfortable home. A company that maybe might be struggling to find a comfortable home, there's no awards for the greenest fossil fuel company, would be Sasol, and Sharmini is joining us as VP of Climate Change at Sasol. I teased you earlier that you must have an empty inbox.
It's very full.
Other than compliance and and monitoring and those sort of things. Do you want to very quickly take us through what you do, but then also what are the plans around climate change with Sasol?
Okay, so what do I do? So it's very little compliance. We have a team of compliance people. I think, Simon, the important thing to understand is everyone is concerned about climate change. And just like Kikeletso, we're seeing an opportunity. We see our business as not being resilient to climate change. We've done extensive scenario analysis. We've included science. We've taken into account, as Tasneema said, we've taken into account what the future is going to look like and what our customers are actually asking for. And so the work that I do is actually focused on trying to understand and project what type of business are we really going to be about into the future. What is that opportunity? Where can we play a role? What do we want to be, and how can we reinvent ourselves? And we're really talking about transforming a Sasol. The Sasol of the future will not look like what we see today. I mean, Sasol's known for innovation. That's how we were born in South Africa. And so we definitely have the skill set, we have the expertise, and we have lots of CO2 to convert. So, we've got a huge risk, but we also see opportunity. And the reason for why I'm going down this road is we see hydrogen as a critical initiative economy sector in South Africa into the future. Sasol produces a large amount of hydrogen already, grey hydrogen. And so we're primed to be able to play in that space. But of course, you need renewable energy. And so we want to play a leading role in renewable energy. We've in fact just put out a request for information for renewable energy, 600 megawatts, the largest yet in South Africa. So we really are taking this seriously. We've updated our strategy. We've got a new strategy called Future Sasol, which has climate action at the heart of the strategy. This has been a bold step forward for us. And so my job is very focused on strategy, sustainability, looking at products, quantification of the impacts, quantification of the opportunities.
So then what does Sasol look like in 50 years' time? We've had BP come out and say they're no longer a petroleum company, they're an energy company. Part of that might have been because they pumped all of their petroleum into the Gulf rather than actually burning.
Yeah.
So they obviously had a major PR crisis that almost forced them, I think, to look at greener options. When Sasol does that long-term scenario planning, are they seeing themselves being a renewable energy company? Are they seeing themselves being a petrochemicals company? I mean, what does it look like?
So into the future, we're still doing the work. In fact, we're coming out with our 2050 roadmap, which is going to detail exactly that, as well as our 2050 target in alignment with the Paris Agreement. So that's coming out next year. We're doing the work as to what that identity is going to look like, but we really do see critical, no regret projects, opportunities for us to play a role in. Renewable energy, no-brainer. Energy efficiency, no-brainer. It makes us money. At the end of the day, these are the opportunities we've got to look at. So we are then leveraging that and then moving into something called gas as a transition fuel. We want to be able to have gas to balance our process. We've got coal, and for us, we need to reduce our process and combustion emissions. It's 50-50. We emit about 58 million tons, so that's a lot, 50-50 on that. So we need a different feedstock, and in the interim, gas plays that role. So we see ourselves playing in the gas economy as well in South Africa, and then also switching customers in the economy, and then into the future, springboarding into hydrogen. How much, what that will look like, it's work we're still doing, and watch the space.
David, all of this requires an underpinning electrical grid that's going to work, that's going to function. You spent many years working with Eskom. You've now thrown your lot in very much with the nuclear of those options that I think are available to us going forward. What would you like to see a grid look like in 50 years' time when Sasol is a hydrogen company, much to everyone's surprise?
Well, thank you. I did 35 years in Eskom, most in the nuclear field. I joined Eskom when Koeberg was being commissioned on the engineering side at Koeberg. And I think what you made a comment about what the underpinning required of the energy system, and it's quite true. Everyone talks about the change in the energy system. And everyone says, and you talk cell phones, and the change has been such that we don't worry about landlines anymore. Nobody cares if the landlines are installed or not. And so therefore, if Telkom was to be closed down, nobody would get excited. Somehow, in this all change of the energy system, everyone says, yeah, we need all these nice renewable stuff, but we still need a main grid with big power stations to back us up when our renewables intermittently don't work, like every night when the sun goes down. Small detail. Unless your power lines go to India or Brazil, in which case you can use their power for evening peak from PV. So the real answer comes back to, if you look at the world experience out there today, and you look at low carbon grids, and that's what we're talking about in sustainability, the dominant low carbon grids in the world, about the only major low carbon grids in the world, are fed by one of two sources. Either large scale hydro, like somewhere like Norway, or large scale nuclear, like France, or a combination, like Ontario Hydro, or like give me a chance, Switzerland and so on, which are largely nuclear and coal. Those are the ones that have low carbon. The ones that have tried to go low carbon by the solution of renewables have never got there. And it's notable in the IRP, it's actually interesting that if you take the scenario with severe carbon constraint on it in the IRP, it only builds nuclear. Because natural gas is actually about as bad as coal in terms of emissions because of the leakage of methane from the pipelines. So the real answer is, if you look, and this country has an interesting example. I said I joined ESCOM in '84. At that point, ESCOM had as much plant under construction as in service. We had like 35,000 megawatts in service and about 35,000 megawatts under construction. That generation of plant, as we know, is getting to the end of its life. And by 2030, we're going to be in a national crisis of needing to replace those coal stations that physically are not able to go on much longer. It's like trying to take an old bus fleet and say, we haven't maintained it for 200,000 K, can we spend some money and paint it better and make it work better? The coal fleet has been worked to death in many ways. So the question really in the country is, what do we bring in as a low carbon solution to replace dispatchable plant in the form of to replace the coal stations? And there are 4 technologies in the world that have ever been used to generate baseload power in a grid, and one of those is hydro, one of those is coal, one of those is natural gas, and one of those is nuclear. And there are countries in the world that have done any one of those to make their full capacity. We were a coal utility. We have no hydro. With due respect, Grandingo is a brilliant hydro scheme, absolutely stunning. It unfortunately is about 4,000 kilometers away from a power line, and nobody on earth is suggesting we should have the lights in Joburg controlled from Kinshasa. Just for that comment, may like our neighbors, but there are limits. We have no hydro. We're a dry country. We're water resistant. So the answer is that of those 4 solutions, the only one that is low carbon and is available to us is in fact nuclear. And the other funny thing about nuclear is the funding is that it's the only technology where funding is actually quite a simple activity. Because everyone talks about nuclear, nuclear is too difficult to fund. Well, the answer is buying a nuclear power station is like buying a motor car. When you go to the vendor and you say, I want to buy my new BMW, and he says, but I will not provide you with any finance. You say, I'll go and find somebody who will. And the answer is, everybody who gets nuclear plants ends up getting finance with them. And it's a standard approach. When I was involved in the bid process in 2007, 2008, which was killed because of the financial crisis, we were getting finance bids from 100% finance coverage, repayment starting after plant startup. And the interest rates are incredibly...
So who are you getting this from other nations? From nation states offering that finance?
Basically, at the moment, we would start, if we're going to build a nuclear plant, and take a classical Coburg type machine, if you were going to put 2 more machines on the Coburg site, you would end up buying a standardized machine from either the French, the Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, or the Koreans. They're the guys who build these things. And you'd like buying a motor car. You wouldn't go and say, I'm going to build my own motor car, I'm going to buy an engine from BMW and a gearbox from Ford, and you don't do that. You buy a standardized machine. With that comes a financing package. Interesting, the Egyptians just signed a financing package for their 4 big machines they're putting in near Cairo. And that financing is, I think, about 3% nominal in dollars, which is about 1% real. So the cost of finance is quite low because, like the car salesman, the guy wants to sell his nuclear power station. So the answer to that question is yes, you get the finance from the banks. It's called Export Credit Agency financing. It's straightforward. And it's important to understand that everyone says, but we can't afford the debt. But every power system that we are putting into the grid, the sovereign is backing. So if you look at the renewables, everyone's so pleased with the money coming into the renewables. The reality is every single rand spent by a renewable company on putting a wind turbine up in South Africa at the moment is sovereign backed by the South African state. There's 200 billion rand at the moment on the National Treasury's books of contingent liability for those. And so the idea that somehow this is only nuclear has this problem. If you look at nuclear, you will get the money from overseas. The other problem you've got is that if you build a nuclear plant, the finance will be raised in the country of origin. So it'll not affect our capital balance. And just to mention water for a quick, because I know water is an important issue, it is notable that the project they're building in Egypt, at El Daba, is 4 units like Coburg, but they've linked them to desalination plants. And if we put 2 machines like that at Coburg, to make Coburg 3 and 4, it would make about 3/4 of the current water consumption of Cape Town from the sea.
Okay, there's three routes I want to go with this. Let me start with you quickly. From a water point of view, there's a number of different ways that our current energy system affects our water. I mean, digging up the whole of the Mpumalanga Highveld is a problem. But we otherwise need water to cool power stations, but we have that opportunity of using power stations to desalinate. Where does your organization stand on this? Are you pro-nuclear? Are you where are you?
Well, I think for us, it's, it's to be smart about nuclear power, but really, IME is an international research for development organization. So we work at the small scale, so for us, it's about incentivizing small scale renewable energy use. It's about how do we promote solar irrigation on farms, for instance.
Okay.
It's about how do we promote conduit hydropower at the very small scale, enough to power up a business, a small business, enough to power up a,
Okay, so you're very pro the idea of decentralizing
exactly,
power. Okay, it was where I was going to go. I want to then come to Tasneem quickly, and ask from a climate change point of view, the different organizations seem to be pro or against nuclear for various reasons. Are you guys more pro a renewable big grid, or do you like the idea of every single house in the country having a solar panel on top of it? Well, we don't have Tasneem in our ears at the moment. There we go.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so firstly, I don't think there's a one size fits all. I think there's space for the kind of big renewable energy infrastructure. There's, especially in a country like ours, a real space for decentralized mini grid or microgrid systems, etc. So I think we have the luxury of looking at what is most appropriate for our development needs, actually. And renewable is an infrastructure that is extremely flexible in terms of where it is located, and so very open to decentralization. I really do want to challenge David, and I think I do want to challenge this notion still that exists that we need huge infrastructure with massive base load and this kind of fixed massive grid system that connects the whole country. I think if we're not going to do what, in fact, Shamini has been speaking about, that Sasol is doing, looking into the future, where are we actually going? And I think we would be completely swimming against a global stream if we still want to maintain these outdated ideas about how energy systems work. It's not going to work like that in the future. And there's already huge disruption in the energy systems across the world. So we are going to run the risk of, and it's very easy for David to say, yes, we'll just get all these foreigners to come and deliver nuclear, we buy it like we buy a car. It's not the case. We do have to take into account the kind of cost to the country, the cost for the future. And it doesn't include, of course, what we do with all the kind of risky risks in terms of health and environment, with waste management around nuclear as well. So I think having this false debate about, the only low carbon technology that's viable is nuclear is wrong in this country. Our own CSIR has come out with studies and done the modeling work and has demonstrated that the low cost options actually does put renewables in the lead of any technology choice. Now, of course, we're not going to go to 100% renewables tomorrow, That's exactly why, if we're saying we're going to be carbon neutral by 2050, we have to look backward and say, well, what do we need to put in place in these next years to be able to transition to where we want to be in terms of carbon neutrality in the country by 2055?
Tasneem, let me quickly give David right to reply then, and then I want to bring Kekaleso in quickly.
Sure.
It's very simple. The CSIR model is interesting, but it has some fundamental assumptions inside it. And I'm a great believer that if I'm an engineer, if you do models, mathematical models, or you always benchmark it against something in reality, you check your model is giving you the same answer as reality is, and then you change your input data and you see how it changes reality. Nobody has yet made anything close to the renewable industry work. I mean, I don't know, but they've recently had load shedding in California. And the concept, and my view is very simple, if microgrids are the future, they don't need the government to support them. Cell phones in Africa did not need government support. It was a fundamental thing. The reality is that everybody who says they're going carbon neutral and off the grid is keeping that line to the grid for that day when they don't have the sun. And the reality is that people say, well, I can trade energy. I heard someone say recently, but the grid's a big battery. And the trouble is, if you had if the correlation of the intermittency was incoherent, that would work. But the trouble is that the sun goes down at roughly the same time everywhere in the country. And at evening peak, everybody wants power. At midday, they want to put power into the grid. The grids that have gone heavily renewable, I use California's example, over half the days of the year, a couple of years ago, over half the days of the year, the wholesale price of electricity in California went negative. Because at midday, there was no demand for anything, but at midnight, at evening peak, they hadn't changed it at all. It's called the duck curve, and it's famous in the industry. So if you tell me I want to have a feed-in tariff, for example, on my little solar panels, that's fine, as long as your feed-in tariff relates to the grid price, not to the wholesale price. I will put a simple answer to the problem we have with renewables. I suspect the place here is paying about R2 a unit per kilowatt hour for the power they're coming through the lights that are shining down brightly on me now. Of that, about 30 cents is the price of the energy. That's the price of the coal, because it's a coal-fed utility. The other R1.70 is the price of making sure that when you turn the light switch on, it comes on. And the renewables say, oh, but that's somebody else's problem. And they have this wonderful phrase called dynamic load management. You've heard that phrase of we're going to do dynamic load management. Eskom does that. It's called load shedding. We didn't go down too well in this country. So the idea we're going to run a country on the basis of perpetual load shedding, which is where California is now, is something. And the chances out there that people who have achieved low carbon energy in the world, if you look at Europe, and you look at the European Union, anyway, I've got some data on it, you'll find Norway comes top, big hydro, followed by Switzerland, nuclear and hydro, France, Sweden, half nuclear, half hydro, and so on. Germany is actually in the bottom half of the curve. Germany's CO2 emissions are about 4 times that of France, and their prices to the consumer are about 50% more than France, and 3 times the price in this country. I can make a model on my Excel spreadsheet which gives you any answer I want. But if I cannot find somewhere in the world where that answer actually is being achieved, then I'm questioning it. And if you believe in microgrids, this is a non-discussion. Because if the microgrids are a non-discussion, if the microgrids are the solution, then you wouldn't need Eskom. Like telecom, it'll just disappear.
Let me now come in and bring Kekaleso in here. And the question I'm going to ask you now is not try and catch you out. Please understand, okay? But you're a small business owner. You've put your business out there as a green business. What energy do you use to produce your bread?
So we still, that's why I'm so fascinated by the ideas, and something that we still need to face is that we still rely heavily on fossil fuels, and it's a concept that's not going to take us a year to change.
Are you on-site fossil fuels, or are you using Eskom?
We're using Eskom.
Okay.
Yeah. So when we start as an entrepreneur, you want to have all of these great innovations, and when you hear all of these ideas of hydrogen and solar power, you tend to think of something big. And we needed to start with conceptualizing the idea of living a greener way, making it a part of our lives, that we change it in every way possible. So if I can start it as an individual by seeing that, okay, my major problem is plastic pollution, or my major problem is ESCOM, or my major, then I need to identify that problem that resonates to not only me, but challenges that mostly my communities are faced. Because if I go back to my community, which is a township in the Free State, and start speaking about hydrogen and nuclear power, those are not terms that they understand. And if we effectively want to influence everybody in their life, we have to speak languages that everybody can understand. Like David is saying, that he has concrete advice that works in favor for nuclear. And I'm no expert of nuclear, but if nuclear works, how about we then find solutions to waste? How about finding solutions to making it more feasible for us, instead of saying, okay, this is an idea, let's start by bashing it. Even with coal, we still have major problems with coal. I live in Sasolburg, where people have chronic asthma from the pollution, where even our cars get affected by the pollution. But I didn't sit back and say, okay, what can I do? It's Sasol, it's bigger than me. I then started, okay, I will make the small impact to make changes. Yes, I know it won't happen today, but I'm fighting for the future. I'm fighting for a greener life that's bigger than me.
An interesting point, and bringing Sasolburg up is fascinating because, I was at varsity with engineers who went on to work for Sasol, and I can't think of another business where the broader environmental impacts of a business affect the actual employees. Everyone has to go, almost like their national service, they have to go and do their 2 or 3 years at Sasolburg before they get to come and sit in Rosebank.
Yeah.
But from what you said earlier in terms of hydrogen, you still sounded like a big energy company that wanted to provide solutions for baseload power. You guys are not really getting involved in decentralizing power, eh?
No. That's not our focus. So we are focusing on firstly decarbonizing our ESCOM imports. That's what we're doing first. We also self-generate ourselves, and we have a mix of coal and gas. And we're looking to add also decarbonizing that into the future. But exactly what David was talking about, we're trying to find a flexible power generation source that can be both a feedstock as well as an opportunity to decarbonize the self-generation portion. And that's why gas comes out. Yes, nuclear might work for power generation, but as a feedstock to move from coal to something else and then into hydrogen, we need an intermediate. And that's exactly where gas plays a role for us. And Sasolburg is a prime example for that. In 2004, we did the fuel switch. It reduced our emissions more than 50-60%, just purely because of the gas coming in. We would like to see the same play out in Secunda. And if that happens, it allows us to integrate with renewable energy and then have deep penetration of renewable energy to then split those molecules to get hydrogen, green hydrogen. That's the thinking. Yeah.
When you were talking earlier about, what is it, 600 megawatts, I think you
Correct.
said, that you wanted to have basically your own generation capacity.
That's across the fence. That's for ESCOM.
Okay. Now, is that just about optimizing your process, maybe taking hydrogen back into the system, or is that actually a standalone solar system that is going to...
Standalone solar system.
Solar, eh?
Solar and wind. We're looking for both. We requested proposals on both. We got about 7 gigawatts worth of proposals. We had to extend the deadline, so we were oversubscribed. But in addition, we are constructing 2 10-megawatt solar PV plants ourselves. So we've put out an RFP for that in addition. So we're going to be starting with that fairly soon. And that's going to be one in Sasolburg, one in Secunda, to start testing out how this works, what are the mechanisms. And we're also looking at an innovative mechanism around how to set up the business construct around exactly what Tasneem said, the just transition, critically important. We have coal mines. If we move out of coal, what happens to our employees? So you brought that up. This is a critically important issue. The moment we said to, the world, this is what we want to do, we are looking at decarbonizing, we want to get out of certain feedstocks, we had employees extremely worried, sending emails, requesting us for information. What does this mean? What does it mean for my home? And these are the things we have to deal with. So I completely agree with Tasneem. This is not an environmental issue. It's an economic issue. It's a political issue. It's about what the structure of the economy is going to look like in the future.
So I think we're at that stage now. We've got about 5 minutes left. I think I'm going to allow each of you to have sort of 45 seconds of comment. I think let's go in the same order that we started with. I think just two comments from me with this is that firstly, I tend to be quite callous around employees worrying what's going to happen to them. No one worries about where are all the horse drivers from the 1800s. People find jobs, the economy changes. I think that is something that the economy will figure out and absorb. There might be individual tragedies within that, and that isn't ideal, but as an economy point of view, people get retrained and they move on. But even as an environmentalist, even as someone who's written books on green energy and green living, my priority is that when I switch the switch, I want the light to come on. That's always been, viscerally as a human being, that's what I want. Tasneem, what are your guys' views for the next, I mean, just very briefly, 45 seconds. Where do you want to see South Africa go?
Well, I do think we want to see South Africa moving towards this carbon neutral economy and society by 2050. And that would include transformation, not just of the energy systems. And Simon, I think it's important for us to understand that the just transition, markets are not going to resolve these things. And you might believe that, but it's important for a just transition to ensure that we plan for these changes, that we ensure that we take care of those who might lose their jobs, reskilling, etc., etc. It's not just the markets are going to do that. We have to plan for that. And it includes the fact that there are going to be sectors in our society, in our economy, that is going to be impacted by the impacts of climate change. So the droughts, for example, has had severe job losses in the agricultural sector. Many farm workers lost their jobs, but we're not actually factoring that into our perspectives on what we need to do as a country on climate change. So for me, yes, renewables are becoming far more feasible, far more affordable, and there's constant innovation. And so David's point about it's going to be about load shedding because the sun goes down doesn't factor in all the innovations that are already underway in the space, including
point well made, because we're running out of time, but I do completely grant that. Do you see a future, Kekeleto, where you are going to be energy independent as your business?
Yes, we do see a future. We're seeing an age where we are going to embrace renewable energy, and we are going to take it upon ourselves to start small, to start with solar panels, to start embracing more positivities around any form of renewable energy. And it starts with us also educating people about greener ways and making it a habitual behavior, with considering the fact that we are already hit by droughts and floods and heat waves. How can we then as SMMEs use that to our opportunity? So if we embrace innovations like hydroponic farming or greener ways to farm, we're embracing small changes that will have a big impact, because when you start an idea small, you are able to increase it and magnify the opportunities and also the saving aspect, So we are seeing it as something that's possible, and it's going to be a new age that's going to come soon. More people are aware of environmental changes and they're embracing
So
it.
from a business owner, incremental change, hoping that will ultimately have a difference. David, I mean, there is that temptation to have a plug and play nuclear station that we can put in, but do you see a future? You used the cell phone example where none of us could have predicted that everyone, even the guy suing a bus stop is going to have a cell phone. Do you see a future where each house is energy independent?
I would love to, but I see no technology there's no technology on the horizon that comes close to meeting that requirement. Everyone's doing so my plea would be to avoid ideology. And I'll give you an example of that. The present financial crisis in this country, which started in 2006 when the lights stopped going on, was a function of an ideology in the mid-1990s that the free market would meet the power demands of the country. And Eskom was told, don't build power stations, the free market will do it, and that's the future. In 2004, the government said, is the 2007 crisis still going to happen? And Eskom said, yes. And the government said, who's building the power stations? We said, well, we aren't, you told us not to. So Eskom was told to rush into a massive program at incredibly short notice, such that anything started that quickly is going to end up badly, and it did. Then we found the only way to get people to do private sector power was to give them government subsidies and prices that exceed the market price by a factor of several times. And we're still in that mode now if you take the cost of energy versus the cost of actual power.
So a lot of it actually, we literally got a minute left.
Right,
so
take the practical solution. We must prove that what we're doing is going to work. We cannot afford to have another 2007.
Last couple of words.
From For me, it's about the local level. You know, it's about the decentralized approach. So it's about incentivizing carbon farming. You know, investing in climate smart agricultural practices, for instance. Like I said, solar irrigation. We haven't even spoken about food and how we reduce waste.
We haven't, but we're not going to because Shamina has 30 seconds. I've got one question. Is Sasol going to employ the same number of people in 30 years' time as they do now, or is it going to be a much smaller company?
We actually have no idea yet. We haven't done the work. That's the roadmap we're going to come out with. But critically important for us, one message I want to leave you with: collaboration. There is no silver bullet here. We need to all work together, all of us across the board, all sectors of society, and we need to find solutions that work for us, not dictated by others.
And that, I think, brings us to the conclusion for today. Thank you very, very much for joining us. It's been fascinating. As always with these sort of panels, we could create another 5 panels of 5 hours each with all of the questions that we've raised from it. But from all of you joining me and from Tasneem, I think down in Cape Town, we thank you very, very much.
Powered by nuclear.
Yeah.
Carbon-free, powered by nuclear.
Cape Town powered by nuclear and uniforms and unicorns and good thoughts and really, really good sunsets. Andile, back to you.
Wow. Wow, thank you